The United States government and a guy going through a midlife crisis actually have a lot more in common than you might think. But instead of a nasty divorce and like a brand new Corvette, Uncle Sam is blowing trillions, literally trillions, on healthcare programs, defense, and monthly checks for 70 million retirees. And unlike a normal midlife crisis that you might just fix with a little therapy and a gym membership, this one is a whole different beast because we're forced to live through it year after year. It is effectively an unprofitable business model. So welcome to this explainer on why America is facing a very real debt insolvency crisis. Today, we're going to completely strip away the politics and just look at the raw, undeniable math. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We're covering the midlife crisis economy, where the money actually goes, the foreign aid myth, the untouchable budget giants, fixing those insolvent funds, and finally, the cost of doing nothing. All right, Section 1. The midlife crisis economy, or basically an unprofitable business. To figure out how the world's strongest economy ended up here, we have to just honestly recognize that the US government has essentially been an unprofitable enterprise since 2001. Trillion-dollar shortfalls, they aren't just some weird pandemic-era anomaly anymore. Since 2020, they've practically become our new national pastime. And that leads us to this absolutely staggering number, $38 trillion. That is our current national debt. I mean, it's a number so huge it honestly feels made up, right? But right now, the country's acting kind of like a college freshman who just got handed a limitless credit card with absolutely no concept of the consequences. Whenever the bill comes due, we just borrow the difference to keep the party going. Now, to really grasp the severity of this, we need to quickly clear up the language we hear on the news all the time. People mix these terms up constantly, but the distinction is absolutely vital. The deficit is our yearly loss. It means we are currently spending almost $2 trillion more than we bring in every single year. The debt, on the other hand, is that massive $38 trillion accumulated total. So we're bleeding $2 trillion annually, and it just keeps piling right onto that mountain. Moving on to Section 2, where the money goes. Let's find the cash flow. If we're going to have any hope of fixing a massive annual deficit, we logically have to look at the actual cash flow. Government spending really falls into three distinct buckets. First up is mandatory spending. This is locked in by law. Think of it kind of like your rent. You just have to pay it. Next is discretionary spending. These are the yearly choices that Congress fights over. Things like defense and education. And finally, net interest. This is the bill we owe for all the previous bills we didn't pay. And let me tell you, it is completely unignorable. Now here is where it gets crazy. Just 5 line items: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, national defense, and interest consume nearly 70% of the entire federal budget. Let that sink in. Everything else, the national parks, education, infrastructure, the whole shebang, that entire remaining 30% is honestly just pocket change in comparison. Section 3. The foreign aid myth. Why we can't just trim the edges. You hear these really passionate arguments all the time, right? People saying that if we just stop sending money overseas, it would solve all our problems. Well, let's just look at the math to see if that holds any weight. In 2024, the US spent about $78 billion on foreign aid. Now, sure, that might sound like a massive number to you and me, but it represents only about 1% of the federal budget. It is completely, utterly dwarfed by mandatory spending, which eats up 44%. Foreign aid isn't even a rounding error in the grand scheme of this deficit. To really put that into perspective, let's just say we cut foreign aid to absolute zero. Gone. What would that actually buy us? 19 days. That's it. 19 days of Social Security payments, and then boom, we are right back to borrowing. It proves a really hard mathematical truth. You cannot fix a multi-trillion-dollar deficit just by trimming around the edges. Okay, Section 4. The untouchable budget giants. So if we actually want to get to the root of the debt problem, the math leaves us with only 2 real areas to target: national defense or mandatory spending. This is the true heavyweight matchup of our federal budget. On one side, you have national defense sitting at $850 billion, or roughly 13% of the budget. We literally outspend the next 10 countries combined. But it's a highly emotional, sticky political issue that lawmakers are completely terrified to touch. On the other side is the absolute Mount Everest of our budget, the mandatory giants of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Combined, they cost a staggering $3 trillion annually. That's 44% of the budget. If we're ever going to fix the insolvency, it absolutely has to happen right here. Section 5.
Fixing the insolvent funds, how we prevent a collapse.
Look, to prevent an automatic collapse of the programs that millions of people rely on, we have to strip away the political ideology for a minute and look at exactly what must be done. Because the clock is ticking way faster than most people realize. By 2033, the Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is projected to be insolvent. And by 2034, the Social Security Trust Fund is going to follow suit. Now, insolvent doesn't mean they just vanish into thin air, but it does trigger automatic, legally required benefit cuts. We are talking about an 11% cut for Medicare and a 20% cut for Social Security overnight. Doing nothing essentially guarantees that millions of people will fall right into poverty. So how do we actually fix Social Security? Well, the math offers two primary levers. First off, we could eliminate the payroll tax cap. Right now, you only pay Social Security taxes on your first $170,000 of income. Anything above that, completely untaxed. Eliminating that cap alone would close 73% of the program's funding shortfall. Second, we could adjust benefits for high-income retirees. I mean, ask yourself, does Warren Buffett really need a Social Security check? Adjusting who qualifies based on vast wealth is a mathematically viable trade-off to save the entire program for the 70 million everyday people who actually need it.
Okay, what about Medicare? Here are the numbers. If we raise the standard Medicare payroll tax rate by just 1%, it would generate more than $1 trillion over the next 10 years. Plus, we really have to look at private overpayments. The data shows Medicare Advantage plans are currently overpaid by 22 to 39%, and that's costing taxpayers somewhere between $83 and $127 billion annually. Reforming those overpayments and just slightly adjusting that tax rate could completely prevent those automatic insolvency cuts. And finally, there's Medicaid. Now, Medicaid doesn't have a trust fund, so technically it can't go insolvent, but it still costs over $600 billion a year. The fix here is surprisingly straightforward. Target improper payments. Right now, over 5% of all Medicaid spending is just lost to data errors, eligibility errors, and overpayments. Cracking down on that fraud and inefficiency would save the government tens of billions of dollars every single year without cutting care for anyone. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6. The cost of doing nothing. These fixes we just talked about, they're all mathematically possible. But let's be honest, they are politically very unpopular. So what happens if lawmakers just keep ignoring the looming math? What happens if America just shrugs and says, we'll deal with this later? What are the real-world everyday consequences of allowing this deficit to just spiral totally out of control? Because let me be clear, it isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet in Washington. It hits your wallet directly.
Here is the exact economic spiral that unfolds. Step 1, the government just continues borrowing trillions to fill the gap. Step 2, investors realize this isn't sustainable at all, and they start demanding a higher return to compensate for the massive risk they're taking. Step 3, this forces the overall interest rates in the United States to rise. And step 4, absolutely everything gets more expensive. Your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card rates, small business loans. A higher national debt eventually chokes the entire economy in slow motion, inflating the cost of your everyday life.
And that brings us to the absolute core message of this explainer. Doing nothing is just not an option. There is no magic bullet here. There are no perfect solutions, only sacrifices and trade-offs. Whether it's raising taxes, cutting benefits, or slashing defense, something has to give before 2033. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. If you are the one in charge of the math, which trade-off would you choose to save the American economy?